The Level 1 CFA exam is an extremely difficult test to pass. The only point of reference that I had when I was studying for and sat for my CFA Level 1 exam was the college courses that I had taken and the midterm or the final exams. And the closest comparison that I've ever been able to come up with is that taking the Level 1 CFA exam covers about as much information as anywhere between 4 to 8 college level exams, but it can also sometimes be more difficult than some of those college level exams. Certainly not more difficult than some of the hardest college classes out there, but it's a challenge for sure. And if you're like me, studying for the Level 1 exam is going to teach you far more about yourself, specifically how your brain best learns, than studying for college exams will. University exams are just not difficult enough to force you to need to study as efficiently and as effectively as the CFA exam will require you to be able to study. So once you start getting into prepping for a CFA Level 1 exam, you start to kind of realize that, and I think it forces you to shift the way that you are teaching yourself things while you study. And while that's sort of an exciting concept, what it also means is that, again, if you're like me and you finished university without ever having to be a very good studier, then you won't have the study skills necessary to efficiently and effectively prepare for a CFA exam, at least during the first few weeks, potentially first few months of your preparation for your real CFA test. So you may end up spinning your wheels for a while. I know I did. It took me probably 3 to 4 months before I was like, I feel like I'm finally figuring out exactly how it is that I need to think through information as I'm reading it and practicing it in order to get my brain to fully digest it. It just literally takes time, just like exercising or distance running or any other physical feat that you've engaged in life. I think becoming an extremely efficient and effective studier is the same way. The CFA exam is going to require that you do those things. Getting to the title of this video then, if you really want to pass the CFA Level 1 exam on your very first attempt, you are going to have to be extra intentional, especially during the first few months of your study periods, in focusing in on what information am I actually learning or retaining and what information am I not really digesting that I'm covering, and then also figuring out what is the difference between how I really, and then also determining during that time period, how does my brain actually best learn new things? And the faster that you can teach yourself how your brain best learns, the better. This video today is being sponsored by myself. I want to plug my in-depth video course where I dig into every little fine detail of all the concepts that I'll be talking about in this video and share with you exactly how I approached every single step along the way in order to pass all the CFA exams on the first try. The link to my video course will be in the description down below. I want to kick it off first and foremost talking about what I have shared in the past and what I still believe to be the #1 determining factor in your ability to pass a CFA exam, and that is the amount of time that you put in, the number of hours that you spend studying. And especially considering what I shared just a moment ago about the fact that the first few months you might sort of be spinning your wheels in terms of really learning to study efficiently, you're going to need to tack more and more hours on to the end of your study window in order to be prepared enough to actually pass the real test. I've always been a huge proponent that studying for 300 hours, which is the commonly used notion about CFA exam preparation, studying for 300 hours I don't think is nearly enough for about 90% of CFA exam candidates. I know it would not have been enough for me, especially when you consider the amount of hours I studied and how close I was to not passing 1 or 2 of my CFA exams. Now, side point, I've heard about, and there is coming, an AI-based study technology, not just to the CFA prep space, but education in general, where AI educational tools may really expedite the amount of hours that it takes to prepare well for an exam. But until that technology is proven and used, I am still going to say, at least for the purposes of this video, talking about 2025, that there's no replacement for hours. And you are really going to need to be intentional about, I think, tracking and logging those hours. And so you are going to need to be very intentional about planning out how many hours you're going to study, and then throughout your study period, tracking and logging all of those hours. I'll share the amount of hours that I studied for each of my CFA exams just as a reference point. Now everybody learns at a different pace. Some people are smarter than others, and I think I'm a generally smart person, but definitely not in the, I don't know, top 3 or 5% of IQ out there. For the Level 1 CFA exam, I studied 471 hours. For the Level 2 exam, I studied 640 hours. And for the level 3 exam, I studied, I believe it was 590 hours. And I have all those things saved in a log in an Excel doc. I just didn't look at it right before recording this video. And I did pass the level 1 exam with a pretty good margin for error, but the level 2 exam I was pretty close to failing on. I barely passed. And the level 3 exam, I passed with a little bit of room, but 5 or 10 questions could have certainly sent it in the other direction. So I don't think that it is absurd to plan to study 500 to 600 hours for every CFA exam. And even in some cases, that might not be enough, depending on your speed of education, how good you are at self-study and all that. So put a plan out in place, hold yourself accountable to it. I talk a lot in my video course about how to actually really follow your plan in terms of number of hours spent studying and how to really hold yourself to that exact number rather than getting distracted and scrolling on Facebook or YouTube or something else during your study period. But again, there's no replacement, at least right now, in my opinion, for more hours spent working. Next, we'll get into the daily study routine. I kept this extremely simple, and I've gotten a lot of questions and comments on this YouTube channel over the years about how many questions to do at a time. Should you be doing the CFA practice questions? Should you be reading all the content? Should you only be watching video lessons from a test prep provider? I'll talk about test prep providers in a few minutes. What worked for me, and so my recommendation to anyone watching this video, is actually just to do something that's consistent, that you're relatively comfortable with, and that you can repeat day after day after day after day after day and onwards. What I did is I would read study notes from the test prep provider that I used. I would do the practice questions from that test prep provider. Then I would go back to the CFA text to do their practice questions. At the time, they were blue box examples and end of chapter questions. Now they have kind of online question modules. But again, it's get exposure to the content, practice it a little bit, get exposure to more content in the same LOS, like more chapters in that LOS, practice those chapters more. And then after you've progressed through it, probably once a week or once every other week, then I would go to the CFAI practice questions, whatever would be available for that book, like the economics book or the equity book or whatever book you're working in at that time. So in my opinion, again, what matters most is being consistent and following a repeatable process that you are relatively comfortable with. I will say, however, I don't think you can be successful just reading information in the CFAI text or in material from a third-party test prep provider. I do think it's very important to hammer practice questions every single day when you're reading and learning concepts, but then also in these like weekly review periods as I just described. And the other point about the daily study routine, going back to the total amount of hours that you're gonna spend studying, is that I think a consistent schedule works best. For me, it was almost always 6:30 to 9:30 each night, or sometimes 7 to 10 each night. And I could do that night in, night out. I studied 7 days a week for the majority of the year. The majority of the year I was studying for the CFA exams. Do the math, in order to get 640 hours, you're studying 3 hours a day for like 8 months or 8.5 months. I would take the summers off because the exams used to only be in the middle Saturday in June every year. So I would take the test, I would have the second half of June off, July, August, September off, and then I would kind of pick it back up in October of each year then, and I would study from October to June, again, 7 days a week, no days off, 3 hours a day. That consistency is what allowed me to hit the number of hours I needed to hit, but it also allowed for a repeatable daily study routine that I knew I was just going to do every single day. One more point about the title of this video. If you're actually gonna pass the test on the first try, you cannot skip study days. You cannot slack on the number of hours that you plan on doing. You cannot skip certain topics. There's nothing that I can say that will cause you to decide to not skip on any study time that you've allocated. You have to make that decision yourself. I have some other tips about it. I've talked about it in other videos, but if you never skip a day of studying, you drastically improve your chances of passing the exam. I think you're probably going to pass the exam if you study enough hours and you never miss a day. So it's simple as making the decision to never miss a day. Now, actually following that decision is the more difficult part, but habits are formed in 2 to 3 weeks, right? Human psychology. So you only have to do it for a little while before it becomes something that, like I described, you know that you're going to do every day. Okay, on test prep materials, this is probably the most common question that I get on my YouTube channel, and it's not necessarily the right question for everyone to be asking. It is a fair question, don't get me wrong. I think third-party test prep providers are valuable. I would never study for a CFA exam without using them. I think they can save you on a lot of time. They can be a resource for extra practice questions. Personally, I like using video lessons to learn, so they were super helpful for me. That being said, going back to one of my earlier points, there's no replacement for hours. So it's not like you can pick a test prep provider that is going to magically improve your chances of passing, twice or 3 times as likely as you would have been had you used some other test prep provider. Now, there may be differences in the quality of some of them, certainly. I would like to believe that the top 3 or 4 CFA test prep providers in the space are all using themes and concepts that are relevant to the exams, and they ask you practice questions through their Q banks that are helpful and similar to what you would see on the real exam, and they probably are. I used Wiley. That's now going back as far as 8 years ago, so I can't necessarily speak to the quality of Wiley today. And then, like I hinted at a few minutes ago, there are some AI-based tools that I know of that will be coming to the CFA prep space, or may already be here, that could be much more efficient based on how good the AI algorithm is at showing you the types of questions that you really need to be practicing, or the material that you really need to be learning in order to most efficiently help you progress in your knowledge base on the CFA program. So maybe, you know, a new type of technology could make a bigger difference than what I'm saying there currently is between the different test prep providers. But at the end of the day, again, I want to make the point that it's not like you can choose your way out of hard work or buy your way out of hard work. I recommend picking a test prep provider that I think they all offer like free trials. So just check them out, see which one you like, that you think looks nice, or that you've heard positive reviews on, and then stick with it. One thing I do certainly recommend is once you pick one, stick with that one for the next 3 years, because you're just going to get a lot more consistency. At least I felt like I did in the way I studied. I'm using the same user interface. Things look and feel familiar to me. I became very comfortable with Wiley at that period of time in my life. So use what you like, but be consistent with it and stick with it. The next topic can be a bit tricky, and that is going to be mock exams. I've always recommended spending about the last 6 weeks before your real CFA exam. Hopefully you've actually gone through all of the content in your level, and you've done tons and tons of practice questions with all that content through what I mentioned and talking about the daily study routine. Now you really need to start putting that work to the test, and mock exams are the best way to do it. Now, I think the CFAI gives you 2, maybe 3 when you register for an exam nowadays. And if you use a third-party test prep provider, they might give you 2, maybe 3 mock exams, but I don't think 4 or 6 mock exams is nearly enough. So if you really do what I say and you do like 2 mock exams a week for 6 weeks, you know, you're gonna need 12 exams. You may have to just find some old forums on the internet where people have posted links to like Google Drives or shared folders that have prior year's CFA real exams. The CFA Institute used to publish each prior year's real exam on their website, and then you could download that and look through those questions. And other people have saved PDFs of prior year's practice exams. Now, if you're using old stuff, certainly be careful that you're not spending time studying on material that's no longer in the CFA curriculum, and be aware that there may be new material in the curriculum today that's not reflected in those old exams. So it's not perfect, but again, if you're following my schedule and kind of try to replicate what I did, you're gonna wanna do a lot of mocks, and so you're gonna need to be able to get access to mocks in order to do that. I have specific videos on this channel talking about how exactly I liked to approach mock exams. I didn't actually treat them as a full exam, any of them except for one. I used one of them as a real-timed full exam, but for the majority of them, I'm just using them as sort of randomly scattered practice questions, because doing mock exams is one of the first times that you will start to tackle big groups of practice questions that are not focused on the same chapter as the other practice questions that you may be doing that day. I think that makes sense the way I just explained it. So it's helpful in that sense. It can also be helpful in refreshing your brain on material you may not have seen for the last 4, 5, 6 months. And it also shows you your areas of weakness. And then I always recommend using the mock exam questions that you answered incorrectly as the place to do a lot of study and review during that last 4-week period. You should then be able to go back through those same mock exams that you took, only review the questions you got wrong. You don't need to review everything you got right, and then rework through those questions, answer them correctly now that you hopefully have actually learned the material that you need to know in order to answer that question correctly. If you are able to do that by the end of 6 weeks and you've gone through 10 or 12 mock exams and you know how to answer every single question correctly on all those exams, you're gonna have a scary good chance at passing your CFA exam on the first try. Finally, the topic that I have previously called the secret to passing the CFA exams, I still totally believe that it is. Until they start giving you formula sheets on the real test, it probably will remain the second biggest differentiating factor. The first biggest differentiating factor between those who pass and fail is the amount of hours spent studying, in my opinion. And the second most important factor is whether or not you memorized formulas in the days leading up to your exam. For the purposes of this video, I'm probably not going to get into the details of how I recommend memorizing formulas. It's a practice that I learned directly from Mark Meldrum in a video he posted on YouTube literally like 1 week before I took my first level 1 exam, and I was like, yeah, I think I'm gonna do this. Especially on level 1, you're gonna run into so many questions on the real exam that are sort of like plug and chug, simple algebra, 3, maybe 4 variable equations, where as long as you know the formula like cold in your head, it's gonna be really easy to just write it down, plug in a few numbers from the question, get the right answer, spit it out. And so memorizing formulas is super important. Watch my my other videos on how to memorize them, exactly what process to follow, or in my video course, the CFA Study Blueprint, I go into every little detail on how I memorized each formula that I thought I would need to know. You can get a formula sheet from your third-party test prep provider. I also have my formula sheets posted on my Patreon page for 19 bucks. Those are the formula sheets that I used to study for my real CFA exams. I only have updated them once. That was, I believe, in 2023. So they're not going to include everything you would need to know, but they are very helpful. I mean, again, they're exactly what I used to pass all my tests. So if you want to see my formula sheets, they're, like I said, available there. And you can also buy third-party formula sheets from any of these test prep providers. Even if you didn't use their curriculum or their courses, you can get a formula sheet for them. Anyway, there's a lot more to memorizing formulas, and I think you should invest 10 minutes in watching someone's video, if not mine, about exactly how to do that, because it is a massive difference maker in your ability to pass the test. Okay, so that's it. As always, if you have any questions, please leave a comment down below and I will get back to all of them. And best of luck studying this year. Thanks for watching.